How do you shape a scene? What is the best way to put the footage together? What can be cut? Can a scene be moved? These are all questions an editor must ask. Hi, I'm Ryan, and this is Cutting Careers, a series of video essays on film editors. First up is the work of Paul Hirsch, who has been editing for over 50 years in films such as Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Mission Impossible, Ferris Bueller, Carrie, and many more. Let's take a look at ways Hirsch experiments with the scene, shaping them to better serve the story. Many of these anecdotes are taken from his book, A Long Time Ago in a Cutting Room Far, Far Away, which I would recommend to anyone interested in film editing. First off, restructuring scenes. It's often said that films are written 3 times, in the script, during the shoot, and in the edit. Scenes are written and filmed to be in a specific order, but that does not mean they need to be edited in that same order. Restructuring can help strengthen the scene's flow. On editing the original Star Wars, problems emerged with the scene in Obi-Wan's hut. As it was written and filmed, they view Leia's message, talk about the Force, play with lightsabers, and then decide to go and help Leia. As Hirsch described talking about it to George Lucas, well, it's as if they've just heard this awful news from her, and they don't react. The world is on fire, and they just sit there talking. We moved the beginning of the scene, as written, to the middle. Now when they hear the full message, they react to it immediately instead of ignoring it. A little reshuffling changes the meaning of the scene and helps the story flow more naturally. Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol also had major reshuffling with the opening sequence in the edit, as he described it to the Light the Fuse podcast.
I thought Ghost Protocol came up with a great beginning. Guy gets killed, his papers are stolen, we don't know what was that, and we find out 2 scenes later what's going on with a flashback that was originally intended to be at the beginning. So the idea was, I think, the best way to start a movie, which is show something, explain nothing, raise a lot of questions in the audience's mind, and then they're hooked. They're interested in finding out what was that we just saw, So this is exactly opposite what they do in fantasy films, where they have long explanations, to tee up the movie.
There has been a war between orcs and humans for as long as can be remembered.
And nobody cares and nobody's interested and they can't process the information anyway. And, it's just a complete misunderstanding of the storytelling process.
Restructuring can also help dramatic beats. Take the parade scene in Ferris Bueller. Originally, it was placed earlier in the film, but in editing, Hirsch realized that they could strengthen the structure of the film by moving it, as he describes in his book. The parade, being the biggest and most dramatic event of the day, should come last. The scene that followed it, the traffic jam scene, would have to come earlier. If we saw a snatch of the parade before the traffic jam and played some band music in the background inside the taxi, we could make it appear that the jam was caused by the parade. This made the taxi scene less arbitrary, and having the parade at the conclusion of the day made it more climactic. These changes do not always need to be big structural ones. Adding or removing a single shot can have a huge difference on a film. Take Brian De Palma's early feature Obsession. There was a problem getting the film picked up for distribution. The film features a wedding scene between 2 characters revealed to be father and daughter. This upsetted all the studios. Hirsch had the idea of changing the wedding into a dream sequence by inserting a shot of Cliff Robertson sleeping, adding a ripple dissolve, and a distortion to the footage. The whole sequence now plays as a dream. By substituting one shot, the producer was able to take it back and Columbia picked it up for distribution. Changing one shot changed the whole reaction to the film. The placement of a single shot can also change the emotional impact of a moment. Take the Death Star explosion in Star Wars.
There was a shot of Tarkin just before the Death Star blew up because I wanted to personalize the moment into something human. Otherwise, it would just be machine, boom, So you had to put a person in there. It was exactly the same thing I had done with Carrie, building up to the yank of the blood falling. I cut to a big close-up of Nancy Allen grinning just before the blood hit, to give that personal aspect give it a little dramatic spin instead of just recording events.
Instead of adding or rearranging, you can always try removing footage. Hirsch is a big proponent of taking scenes out and experimenting. Removing scenes can create interesting juxtapositions. If a scene is really necessary, it will be obvious. Good film always finds its way back into the movie. Originally, Star Wars intercuts the opening escape of C-3PO and R2-D2 with Luke observing the action on his farm. There's also a scene where he goes and talks to his friends. It slows the pace down considerably, and taking it out gives more mystery once the droids land on Tatooine. Removing these sections also gives Luke a more natural introduction later in the film. If you take something out and it doesn't work, you can always put it back in. Another note on removing footage comes from Tom Cruise after viewing a rough cut on the first Mission Impossible, as Hirsch tells it.
And he came out of a screening and he said something about, he wasn't being critical or harsh or anything. He just said, I see you still have all the entrances and exits left in. And sort of a penny dropped in my mind. I thought, entrances and exits, interesting. Because, the first rule of editing is cut to the chase, get rid of the stuff you don't need. And I never thought about entrances and exits. And I thought, yeah, who needs and I started thinking, you could just cut to somebody in frame. You don't have to have them walk into frame, So this became an operating principle of mine from then on.
Oh, wow.
In all pictures. And I thought, well, why do you need, occasionally you do an entrance or an exit, but, it's usually unnecessary. It's a stronger cut if you cut to somebody in frame doing something as opposed to just walking in and then doing something.
Paul Hirsch has had a long and storied career, and I could easily make this video hours longer by adding more anecdotes from his excellent book. The stories show us how editing is an experimental process, and often, the best cuts are found through these experiments. If you never try it, you'll never know what the effect may be.